evening, ladies and gentlemen. How nice to see you here. I have two very, very eminent actors here with me, so I'm sure there will be no trouble about them being heard. But we are going to speak up, and you are going to listen. Yes? Marvellous. And it is my very, very great privilege to introduce to you, I'm sure I don't need to, Anna Carteret and Edward Petherbridge. Now, the thing about Anna and Edward is that they are, in the present, both of them still very distinguished actors, but I think it is probably the case that of all the people who are going to take part or have already taken part in this series of platforms, they are probably, if not the only two, then certainly one amongst a very few who go all the way back through the entirety of those 50 years. And that makes them particular and special in the way that this story is told. As you know, the device that has been used to frame this particular strand of platforms is that each participant has been asked a series of questions, and I expect you probably already know what those questions are, because I suspect some of you are very, very well informed. But each participant has been asked to answer a series of questions. And I'm not going to read out those questions first off. I'm just going to plunge in, and we're going to start with question one.
The only thing is we've forgotten the answers.
Well, do you know what, Edward? I have no doubt you'll manage to make up another one. So, make up in the best sense, you understand?
Yes, indeed.
But the first question, which we would love to hear your answers to, is about your beginnings at the National Theatre. And so it's about when and where and with whom you first engaged with the National Theatre. Anna, would you like to start?
Yes. I first played at the National Theatre at the Old Vic in 1968, when I was about 5, with Peter Brook in Oedipus, and John Gielgud and Irene Worth were the two leading actors. I was only in the chorus, but it was one of the most exciting productions I'd ever been in, because some of the chorus were chained to the pillars in the auditorium, and others of us went rushing up to the top of the upper circle and the circle just in time to get to the front of the circle and say our line, and mine was, "He met the sun face to face," and then run all the way back and down onto the stage in time to continue with the rest of the chorus. And I don't know whether you've heard this story, but at the end of the play, the stage came apart and a huge phallus rose up like this, absolutely enormous. And
6
apparently, 6 feet, yes. And apparently
Coral
Brown... Stop interrupting. And apparently Coral Brown was up in the circle and was overheard to say, "Nobody I know, dear."
Right, well, moving swiftly on. Edward, what about you? First time.
Well, I would like to tell the story about the night I went on unofficially in Oedipus, but perhaps there'll be time for that at the midnight matinee. What's the question? When was that my first?
What was your first? It actually says the question is drafted as your first encounter with the National Theatre.
Ah, yeah.
But I think it's inviting you to talk about your first encounter as a performer rather than as perhaps a member.
Well, I suppose it was my audition that I did for Laurence, Olivier. This will enable me to do a short riff here.
Right.
I was. I have to be as far back as I can. I was told by Bill Gaskell when he asked me what I was going to do for my audition. I said, "Well, I thought I'd like to do Richard II." "Oh God, don't!" You know, it wasn't sort of gutsy and Brechtian enough for him, and don't do that. And I said, "Well, I'll do a little bit of Rookery Nook as well." Now, Rookery Nook is a famous Aldwych farce, and I'd played it in Weekly Rep, you see, and I thought that would be a good contrasting piece. And when I walked into the rehearsal room, at Aquinas Street, they'd attached a huge kind of hut to the huts, which are the National Coal Board huts, as we all know, where the administration was. And there was a long line of people, as long as this line here. There was Diana Boddington, who was eventually damed, I think, for her services to stage management, and God knows how many people, and all the assistant directors, who some have since become famous or been forgotten, and Laurence Olivier was there, and so and I thought, well, it's like playing a thin matinee in Stockton-on-Tees or something. And I might have to wait for the laughs, and I did. And I had to do a little bit of the backstory about this farce, which I've forgotten. But anyway, it's Rookery Nook, you see, and it's a house party. And Rafe Lynn party, was kind of febrile, stick insect of an actor with a monocle. Do you remember? And I used to be able to do that. But anyway, he comes in, and he's very late, of course, and he meets the Daily Woman. Rookery Nook? Yes. Good, I'm coming here. I was told I should be met by the Daily Woman. Are you it? The Daily Woman? I'm not so sure as I am now. Well, perhaps you could find out. Now, I have I have at home waiting for me my 4 children, not to mention my husband and whatnot. You have 4 children and a whatnot. I wonder you find time to be a daily. now, how did you have to come? I'll show you the house and quit. Where's the quit? No, go. Oh, quit. I thought you meant the quit was sort of well, I mean, quit. It could be anything. Now here's the dining room. Oh, a nice square room. Thank you very much. And there's a bedroom down there. Oh, really? And the other bedrooms is elsewhere. There are the stairs. Oh, impossible. And so on. And then, of course, they meet a juvenile lead girl in pajamas somehow, who they have to sequester in the house, all unofficially. And they're trapped with this girl when the housekeeper lady comes back in the morning, and so he decides to be the front man to keep her at bay, and attack being the best form of offence. And this is what got me into the National Theatre. So I hope you're going to be tolerant.
We're just longing to know if you got the job, Ted.
Well. You'll be incredulous when you find out what the answer to that question is. So he comes out of the door and catches her coming up the stairs. And they've got all kinds of nefarious stuff behind this door. So, what? At this hour? I don't understand your reason, luckily for you. You dare to do this, coming here hours afterwards, crawling upstairs like a balloon? A balloon? And me with no tea and early cot-hold water. Shave, you know, hot pot, tea and shaving. Go away with you right away. I have not come much more out for my time. What more do you want me to do? There's only one thing for you to do, that's your old friend, the quit. Now, look here. You're going to be paid off. How much? I'll take £1. She'll take £1. You'll take £1. I may say I've taken this not to work here. Why didn't you say that before? Anyway, I got the job. No, please don't. And I got a lot more laughs on that occasion. But that is Tempus Fugit for you.
Ted,
yes.
you got the job, but it wasn't to play in Rookery Nook. What was it to do?
It was to say, "'Tis true, most worthy senior, the Duke's in council, and your noble self, I'm sure, is sent for." That was my entire contribution to Othello.
The question to the audience is, what's the play?
Othello.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Correct.
And that was spoken to Laurence Olivier, so I was rather favoured, I think, that I actually spoke my first line to him.
So that was your first encounter with Laurence Olivier. This is quite an important first encounter, given how absolutely central he was to the development of the National Theatre. So, Anna, what was your first encounter with Laurence Olivier?
A play called The Advertisement, which Larry directed with Donald McKechnie.
Were you on Larry terms with him?
I'm sorry, we all were.
I never called him Larry in my life.
And so your first encounter with him was as a director?
Director, yes.
Okay. There's going to be a certain element of acceleration going on in the course of this platform, because I think if I don't push things on, we might not get through all the questions. So I don't know why I think that, but you know.
We played together in The Advertisement. We were juvenile leads together.
Oh, well, that's another. Is that? Yes, of course. That's.
Yes.
Well, that's. Another marvellous memory. So now, who would you describe, this is the next question, okay, everybody's next question is, who would you describe as an unsung hero of the National, on stage, backstage, in an office, or elsewhere? Edward.
Well, there was a young man who used to have a job of, some of you remember that the old Pros Arch of the Old Vic was no longer there. It was, the stage came forward beyond the Pros, and the boxes weren't there anymore. And there was a great big Sean Kenny sort of brown thing, which was actually made of white plaster and painted brown to look like wood. Do you remember this? So everything was played much further down, and the gods were much further up as a result in the angle. Anyway, there was somebody who I caught one day going around with a brush on a long pole, and he was just touching up the little bits of chipped white so that for the performance it would look completely brown and no chips of white plaster showing. And he used to do that before every performance. And he became a designer. His name was Gordon Aldred. And I met the other hero, unsung hero, was a man I met who was part of a stroke association party who came to see the show I did at the Young Vic in the spring. And I was introduced to all these men. They were varying ages and stages of recovery. And there's a very old gentleman who was just sitting here and said, "You won't remember me. I didn't understand the show, but I enjoyed it. And I actually painted the set for the Royal Under the Sun." And I'd forgotten his name, and I looked up to see if there was a set. Of course, nowadays, the National Theatre programmes go on forever. They tell you who the janitor is. But then they didn't mention people like scene painters, so he's a very unsung hero.
Indeed, but
Yeah.
now he has been sung.
Now he's been sung.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Anna, I didn't give you a chance to say, I think, one other thing that you wanted to say about your early encounters with the National, which is that you were also in the first season here on the South Bank, I think, weren't you?
Yes, I think it was actually the first production.
Yeah, which was...
it was called John Gable Borkman and directed by Peter Hall with Ralph Richardson, Wendy Hiller and Peggy Ashcroft and Frank Grimes. Frank
Grimes, yeah.
Yes. And as soon as we opened in the Old Vic, and then when I heard that we were going to be transferred to the new National Theatre, I wrote Peter a letter and said, "Dear Peter, I'm awfully sorry, I'm not going to be able to do the transfer because I'm 5 months pregnant." And I got a letter back by return saying, "Oh, don't worry, I don't think it'll be a problem. We'll work round it." And so I did do the transfer, and it lent a very interesting perspective on the relationship between Fanny Wilton and Earhart, who is Peggy Ashcroft's son. And you know, apparently that was the first time that had ever happened in the history of theatre, and it was a wonderful experience.
So, Anna, also tell us who are your unsung hero or heroes?
It took me a long time to decide this, but I think Linda, who is at the stage door and was there right from the start of the new National Theatre, she made it her job to know everybody in every single department and got to know our relatives, our friends, and to know who we wanted to see and who we didn't want to see. And just, you know, in the days before mobiles, she would continually be passing on phone messages, and, you know, she was just a wonderful person.
And she's still there?
And still
She's
is.
still there?
Yeah.
Yes.
And still wonderful. So the next question is about the performance by an actor that has left a lasting impression on you. And who wants to go first on that one? Anna, shall I start with you and move to Ted, and then you can keep talking?
Yes, it again took me a long time to decide, but I think Maggie Smith in The Beau Stratagem, directed by Bill Gaskell, I think it was 1970, and it was the first time I'd ever seen Maggie on stage, and she was extraordinary. She was very, very understated and very truthful and very funny. And it made me realize that in order to be a good comic actor, you have to be extra truthful. And that's something I learnt from watching Maggie.
She was also, they were fantastically sexy together,
yes, they
weren't they?
certainly were.
She and Robert Stevens. Edward, what about you?
Well, there's a toss-up between Geraldine McEwen in The Flea in Her Ear, and she's going to lose the toss to Laurence Olivier's Othello, of course. Every time I hear, I'm having a senior moment here, the last but one director of the National Theatre.
Trevor Nunn.
The last but one before that.
Richard Eyre.
Richard Eyre, talking about Laurence Olivier's Othello. It gets, it began by being almost risible, and now it's risible. And I heard him slag off Laurence Olivier gently on the radio only last night. So I feel I have to box Laurence's corners if he needed it. I can't see Othello anymore without, however good the Othello is, without hearing how he did and thinking, no, it goes like this. And of course, I remember Olivier sitting at a canteen. He used to occasionally come and have a sausage on the canteen table with us, and you prayed that he didn't sit on your table because you just prayed that he wouldn't, but he did sometimes. And he said they didn't used to like the way I did poetry in verse in Shakespeare, because they said, you see, the thing is, he said, I wouldn't sing. And you hear old recordings and Olivia, Gielgud going on, and it's all. But of course, Olivier's Othello is sung. There's no doubt. He certainly sang in a fashion that nobody would sing now.
Well, I think a lot of people probably agree with you about that, and the judgments that are made about it are actually largely about taste, aren't they, really?
Yes, and
now?
of course one mustn't look at the film, because he knew he couldn't do it on film, and he was upset by it, and although he got an Oscar nomination, or only an Oscar.
Something.
Yeah, yeah.
So, of the performances that you gave yourselves in the National, which has been the most fulfilling, is the word in the question, the one that perhaps you feel still most attached to or proudest of, or?
Very difficult, isn't it? I think probably Man and Superman, which by Shaw, that was directed by my husband, Christopher Morahan, with Dan Massey, Penelope Wilton, Basil Henson, Michael Bryant, Greg Hicks. And I remember one being astounded by the scene in Act 3 when Dan Massey's character, Tanner, has fallen asleep and wakes up and finds himself in hell. And so there's this whole scene in hell. And then I remember Christopher giving me a note. There was a scene when Violet Robinson has secretly married Hector Malone, which is Greg Hicks' character, and is pregnant. And she has a scene with his father where she tries to get him to give them money and somewhere to live. And Christopher said to me, silver pistol. So I thought about this, and I played the scene quite subtly, but very, very accurately, and hit my target. And he gave us the money, and in fact, an abbey to live in. So I remember
I think you could count that a success, couldn't you? Yeah. And that's the one that you go back to when you think about the various things that you did. What about you, Edward? I think what you're going to say, and I think that possibly many people will remember the same thing, so tell us.
Well, I did lots of things for 3 and even 4 years. I mean, they have no idea nowadays. You used to end up some little part you were thrilled about, and then you'd find after 2 performances that it was a pathetic little part, and you'd be still doing it 4 years later. When you'd escalated yourself a little bit up in other parts of the repertoire. But I did do Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead for 3 years, and with John Stride first, perhaps the happiest twosome on the stage I've ever been in, and then with Edward Hardwicke after that, when he left. And I can still remember whole tracts of it. And I was very, very pissed off not to be asked to play the player when Trevor Nunn did it not long ago. And I even asked, when they lost their player, I even sent an email very swiftly to say, I know it still. What? An audience! Lucky thing we came along, and so on and so forth. But no. Anyway,
so it was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that you remember as being the role that stays with you of all that you've played from the National?
Yes, it's the sort of thing that I have fantasies about doing, a sort of a castle of Elsinore dripping with cobwebs, and a very old Rosencrantz and Guildenstern come on, and they're still playing it. And the Hamlet is old, and because the play, it's about this play that goes on in a loop all then. They never know that they're destined to die, and never know what they're meant to do, and they have to learn it all afresh, and they're only Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. It's the most extraordinary existential. But apparently, Tom didn't know what existential meant when it was mentioned, when his play was described as that. He'd never heard the word before. I heard. Anyway, and I didn't either. But I learned about it at drama school, actually. Anyway.
The wonderful thing about that, of course, is that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Tom Stoppard, and indeed Edward Petherbridge and Anna Carteret, are so fixed in all our imaginations now that we sort of think they were always who they are. But of course they weren't. They were all young, and they were all doing things for the first time. And I think it's fabulous to remember how Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in particular was...
Yes, I know.
This is a recurring theme.
The court was very distinguished.
Yes.
And there was a deep irony about it too, that these jumped-up bit part players, and I was a jumped-up bit part player, as Guildenstern is when he put into Stoppard's play, of course. But we had this whole, I think it was about, forgive me, I keep having to get up, I don't know why. Am I still in shot? They have this 20-minute or 15-minute scene before anybody comes on. And every night, I suddenly thought of this not long ago. In the wings, were assembling the people who were going to come on as the courtiers when the court suddenly burst on. And one never heard a single peep out of them. And there were about 13, 14, all dressed up to the nines in courtier costume, and they suddenly all came on. And they'd all been reading the Evening Standard or whatever actors do while playing tiny bit parts, you know. And they all they pulled rank on us as if they were absolutely the leading courtiers. And who are these people that and they played that so convincingly, and then swept off and never heard of again until the next time they came on. And that was an irony I didn't think of at the time.
It was a great piece, though. It still is a great piece. Anna, you've mentioned twice now pregnancy. Once was once your own, and once that of one of your characters. And I think it's only right to say that I imagine that pregnancy gave rise to your daughter.
My other daughter.
Your other daughter. Yes. Right, because of course the dynasty continues. But we might come to that later. So we've got your own work at the National Theatre, and the next question about that is what performance or production at the National Theatre did you miss that you wish that you had seen?
Ironically, it was Larry's Othello. Because I recently saw Adrian Lester, who I thought was absolutely brilliant, and it immediately made me think, I wish I'd seen Larry's, because it must have been completely the opposite. And apparently Larry used to go to the gym every single morning to build up his muscles. And also he lowered his voice an octave. So he became this completely, sexy, grounded person. And I'd love to have seen it.
There are some lovely photographs. If you go up to Chris Arthur's level, where Chris Arthur used to be an electrician in the Old Vic, and he used to take photographs. And he took some photographs with a very long lens from the lighting box at the back of the dress circle of the Old Vic, through double glass and everything, of Olivier in performance with Frank Finlay as Iago. And they're up on the level in Chris Arthur's photographs. And they are the best photographs of Olivier as Othello that you could hope to see.
Gosh. Let's go and look. What's the performance that you missed that you would...
Well, I harp on about Olivier all the time. For some reason, I didn't go to... I'd just left the National, and I must have been touring in the provinces or something. I missed the party by Griffiths, and in which Olivier gave his last stage performance. And I went, all expectant, to the British Library, where they keep an archive of all the things that ever recorded. And they recorded all the performances, audio, and they have anything you want to listen to. And that is one play that was, for some reason, never recorded. And so I thought I was going to hear it the other day, and I didn't. So that is missed, truly missed.
Yes.
And I've missed so many things recently here, so many iconic productions at this last period of Heitner. But, the list would be too long, because one doesn't have enough time to go to the National Theatre all the time. You'd never do anything else.
It's absolutely true. Yeah. So now the next question is a kind of odd one. I mean, quite fanciful, but fancy dress costumes. Which would you, of the National Theatre costumes that you've seen, would you opt for to wear to a fancy dress party?
I ended up choosing something that I wore because it gave me great pleasure and fun. It was The Maid in Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It was directed by Zeffirelli and had Larry, Joan, Frank Finlay, Martin Shaw, you name it, and we had such fun. And Franco sort of suggested that I played her as a bit dopey. So I found this black wig in Brixton Market with hair sticking up like this. And I got my costume and I had it all sort of lopsided and short and petticoat hanging down. And I sort of developed a gimbal head. Anyway, I just, that came to mind. I thought,
You can't be accused of vanity.
No, indeed.
When you get
the Clarence Stowe went to war.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad I cued you with that.
So, what about you, Edward?
Well, I was in a production of The White Devil, which at the Old Vic, designed by somebody called Gerardi, I think. And he his CV said that he had a house in Bangkok and something, and he was a very exotic figure. And the costumes, there are photographs again on the upper landing, and you won't believe what they're wearing. I mean, Geraldine McEwen is wearing a wig that starts up here, and great big sort of, and almost any costume out of that. And I wore, accentuating my then even thinner frame, I wore black tights and a black lace, very, very coarse, heavy lace blouse, through which I was sort of visible, and a rather posh beard and a wig. And I wouldn't be able to wear that anymore, but...
oh, I don't know.
Well, if you can wear... If you can wear your dotty way, we could go together.
Yes.
And we would have to decide who would look the dottier, I suppose.
One of the things I remember about the costumes in that production, which I'm sure some of you will also have seen, was the moment in the trial scene when Geraldine was wearing, she came in white, wearing something wrapped around her in white, and at a particular moment of defiance, she threw off the hood and it turned into, in front of you, a bright red
Scarlet
dress.
Yeah.
And that moment of character in costume has stayed in my memory too. I think they were rather fabulous.
Can I just get in another thing about transformation scenes of costume in that production? There was a blackout in which I used to stand very near to he was playing the cardinal, the Pope, and I always forget it. I always forget his name.
Audience knows everything. Tell us.
John Moffat. John Moffat. It's one of my John Moffat. And he used to wear a big hat, kind of purple, like that. And I wore a sort of little black thing like that. And one night, in the blackout, before we went out, I took his hat and get down in it. So I had these black tights and this enormous hat. And there's nothing he could do about it. And the next night I went to do it again, and I felt...
I think that's a warning. Okay, so we've got your fancy dress kit. That's going to be quite a party. And this next question is about the National Theatre itself and about the building. And where's your secret favourite place in the National Theatre that the rest of us might not know about?
It's not really a secret. It's in the dressing room, looking out over the courtyard at all the other dressing rooms and, you know, saying hello and calling to each other and telling each other our news. And I just used to love that.
And that's about the way that the dressing room block is constructed, isn't it?
Yes.
That so that you're all looking out.
And you could see people in different costumes.
Yes,
from
doing different
days.
shows.
Yes.
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 Yeah. And Edward, what about you?
Well, Dennis Lasdun's concrete is something one loves to hate, and I find that particular... You can imagine when you're looking, you've no idea where you are in relation to the Thames or the rest of the world. You can see the sky, you can see so-and-so, hello. But when you go out, you have to think, which auditorium am I going to? And people have been known to go through a door and was behind them. And they've had to be let into the auditorium and climb up the stairs. It's true. Anyway, so I'm remembering a place at the Old Vic. I was, for a very long time, even when I was playing Guildenstern, I was in top dressing room, right up the stairs. And a floor up from my third floor dressing room was a little corridor with a cubby hole, a sort of little door, and you could open the door and go into the fly gallery, where all this happens. And it was the hemp that was like a ship's deck, piles of hemp coiled up. And I would creep in there and sit on there, terrified that I would release something heavy onto the, I couldn't have done, but, there was that thought that a piece of scenery hanging up there might go down. And I used to watch, because I was understudying Iago, I used to watch Othello and Iago's temptation scene from up there, trying to keep myself where they couldn't see me. I'm distracted. So that's gone now, because the whole backstage has been gutted, and so it's not there. Except that's another thing that's in my DNA, which they can dig up one day.
It is there in your mind.
Yes, yes.
Yes, it is one of the interesting things, I guess, about having spanned really quite a long time in theatre history, that a lot of things that would have been very familiar to you when you were young actors have gone, like the fact that flying was done in a completely different way, like there wasn't very much automation, and you had to be a lot more careful as well. I mean, I'm very alarmed to think of you up there on the fly floor, frankly. These days, I don't think that would be allowed. I think there'd probably be a security door to stop you doing that. But it's rather lovely that you did. Okay, we're getting to the last question, but it's got three parts, this question. And it's about you becoming, for a moment, programmers of the National Theatre's repertoire. And what we've asked you to do is to programme a day which has a morning and an afternoon and an evening session, and tell us what you would put into those slots.
Again, it was very, very difficult to choose, but I've put in the morning The National Health by Peter Nichols, which was directed by Michael Blakemore and took place in a hospital ward.
Which you were in.
I was in.
Would you be in the performance, or would you be watching yourself doing it? How do you... No, I'm interested. Or would it be a new cast?
I'd rather be in it.
Yeah.
And it was just a very pertinent and funny and sad and the kind of play I'd never seen before. And of course is getting more and more pertinent with everything that's happening with the National Health Service. So that was my choice for the morning. Do you want me to tell you the others?
I do.
Oh, right. And the afternoon, I thought of No Man's Land by Pinter, directed by Bill Gaskell, and it had Ralph Richardson, John Gielgud, Terence Rigby, and Michael Kitchen. And
Was that Gaskell?
Yes. Was it not? Oh, Peter Hall. Sorry, Peter.
I told you the audience knew everything.
Sorry,
It's fine.
sorry. I think it was the first play by Pinter that I'd ever seen. For some reason, I hadn't seen any others. And I found the performances so truthful and the whole play absolutely fascinating. So that's why I thought it'd be an interesting choice for the afternoon. And then the evening, I thought of Wind in the Willows, directed by Nick Heitner, and Michael Bryant was in it, playing Badger. And I heard this story that they all went to the zoo to do research on the animals they were playing. And when they got back to the rehearsal room, you know, Nick was asking each of them what they discovered. And Michael said, "It's extraordinary, you know. I discovered that the badger was exactly like Michael Bryant." It'd be fun to finish it.
Yes. Yes, and so it was. Edward, what about your three?
Do you have a note of what I told you? Because I've completely forgotten, because I'm so confused.
I do. The first
yeah.
one, we've already talked about it, it's the party.
Oh, yes. I'd quite like to see the party. The trouble is, every time one mentions a play, one disqualifies so many others. But I would like to have seen the party, because Olivier, as you all know, had a very long speech, and he was having memory problems then. And sorry, it's just that one story sparks off 5 more. My brain is crammed with anecdotes I could tell you about Laurence Olivier's memory. Anyway, for the first rehearsal, he knew it completely and got through it and said, if I get through it now, I'll be able to get through it. I wonder perhaps why it's not recorded is because he died or something.
It might be that, or my memory is that he didn't actually play all the performances. Is that right, audience?
Oh.
I'm just wondering whether it was. I think it was his last live performance in the theatre. But I'm wondering whether perhaps by the time they got round to archiving it, he was not performing at the time. It might have been that. I don't know.
Coming up closer to where we are now, I suddenly thought I'd like to see The White Guard again, because it's such a terrific play and such a flawless production and performance, I thought.
So we're going to put that in the morning, The White Guard in the morning?
Possibly.
Okay.
And what else did I say?
Well, in the matinee, what's written here? I'll have to say this, but it says play
A play
title
by
Beckett.
Plus
or another short play to be decided.
Yes,
And,
well, it's a short play plus another play.
Plus,
you see,
I
a double bill.
understand now
And
that
I
that's what you
haven't been
meant.
able to think of a single, but there was something in his own right, W-R-I-T.
Yes.
In his own right was a sort of play by one of the Beatles.
John Lennon.
John Lennon, which I never saw because I'd left and thought, fuck them. And, but apparently it was a terrible failure. In fact, they went through after I left the National Theatre, they went through a great period of failure. And so I'd like to rub my hands over in his own right, whilst watching them struggling in those funeral urns to be Beckett's lost souls in funeral urns. You know, they used to have actually porridge oats on their faces. And Beckett famously said there was a great dispute about it, it's famous, great dispute. Tynan wanted it all to be inflected and humanized, and Beckett, and therefore George Devine, who was directing it, they insisted on it being absolutely monotone. And Beckett famously said, if I could get machines to play these parts, I would. Can you imagine? So I'd quite like to see that again. I did see it. I wouldn't want to see Philoctetes, to correct it, directed by Bill Gaskell again. And I didn't want to see it at the time, but I had to.
So we've got Beckett and John Lennon in
Yes.
an unusual pairing
Yes.
in the afternoon. And in the evening,
Have I said anything?
you have
Give me a clue.
musicals.
Oh, yes. Well, I missed Trevor Nunn's Oklahoma, but I'd quite like to see Guys and Dolls again, which
Wouldn't
was...
we all?
Yeah.
Before we finish, which we must, I just wanted to go back to the question of pregnancy. Because what, of course, I was referring to was, and Anna, you might like to tell us what you were doing when the other daughter was cooking, because your daughter Hattie is, of course, on stage, probably about to go on.
1978,
Yeah.
yes. I was at the National, but I can't think what I was doing.
Well, I wonder whether what she heard in utero, as it were, formed her, because indeed now in 2013, there she is playing a part which you yourself played, I understand.
Yes.
Playing Nora.
Isn't that wonderful?
So, as I say, the dynasty continues, and there are new people coming along to take the place of those who move off the stage. But it is such an enormous pleasure, I'm sure you will all agree, to have had an hour in the company of these two people who have such a wealth of experience and memories, which we've only been able to tap into a tiny, tiny proportion of them. But I think you will have had a flavour this evening of just how rich those memories are. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you.